I am so happy to be here. Thanks so much to Bsides Seattle, Josh and Hugh for, getting me to this talk. One of the things I'll say just off the bat is I'm so glad that I do not have to be up and speaking at 9 a.m. Seattle time. I'm actually in my home in Columbus, Ohio, and it's about noon. But what I want to talk to you today is about this idea of centering security around humans. And it's a really, really personal and very passion-oriented subject for me, mainly because of who I am and what I do. And so it's probably important that I share with you a little bit about myself. So I am Juliet Okafor. I'm the CEO and founder of Revolution Cyber. And my company focuses on user behavior, risk management, and modification. And you're probably wondering what that means, and a lot of people do. But essentially, what my job is as a security professional is to get into the minds of people, of users. And I've been very weird about this idea of hacking the human or hacking the human mind. I just don't believe in that. But ultimately, what I feel like is we've got to gain a better understanding in order for us to really focus on risk and compliance and do what it is that we are supposed to do as cybersecurity professionals. We need to better understand the people who we're working for and the people who we serve. So I'll give you a little bit of a background about myself, and I'm not even going to focus on the professional piece. I want to focus on the personal element because that'll be critical to what we discuss today. I am a human empath. So I don't know if anybody in the audience is an empath, but I'm somebody who connects on a very visceral and spiritual, emotional connection with other people. And I have this ability to really feel how other people feel. And it makes it so that I have these great connections with other human beings, but it also makes it so I can often feel very overwhelmed. And so one of the other traits that I have is that I tend to be a highly sensitive person. And so I get overstimulated, and then I tend to need to be re-energized. So I've got to spend a lot of time alone and really figuring out what the things are that are like draining my energy sources. And I'm also ADHD. So I've got attention deficit disorder. I've had it since I was a kid. They diagnosed me in law school because everybody else in my class was able to, digest these large books in such a record number of time, and I struggled with it. And I was diagnosed at that time and had no idea that I had this problem because I'd done pretty well previous to that. But I also found out that I was neurodiverse. There was just a way that I thought that most people did not, and all of that is kind of revealed in all the things I just mentioned. So I've had a very, very interesting foray into cybersecurity. Started in sales. I started as an account executive about 6 years ago, helped to build out the first SOC in the Bank of Zambia, Zaraco. And I've also managed really large scale teams, sales teams in the Philippines, India, and really across the globe, also working in Tanzania and South Africa. But one of the things that, my time in cybersecurity has taught me is that there's a lot of benefit to what we do. In fact, so many people that I know, just like you, are drained by how much there is to do. You could spend 24 hours doing your job and really never get to the end of it. There's always more work to be done. But one of the biggest areas that I found in cybersecurity is that we were missing. The reason why I felt like a lot of the burnout was happening is that we were focusing so heavily on technology. We were focusing so heavily on building out security operations programs, security operations centers. What is it to do penetration testing? That we had never really started to really think about what the purpose is of what we were doing and who is it that we were trying to benefit. I think, when I joined the security space about 6 years ago, one of the biggest values that I was able to offer both my clients and my customers was I was able to talk them through the value of cybersecurity, the benefit of penetration testing systems, the impact of having operations that included the business operations processes of the broader parts of the business. And over and over again, one of the biggest things I found is we were rarely ever considering the people in which this had to work for, right? So people in organizations, people like myself who are, either they're busy, they're distracted, they are overwhelmed. They have still a job to do that has nothing at all to do with cybersecurity. And one of the questions I found that people were not answering is, why do these people even care? Why would anybody care that the organization is at risk? Is it my job to protect an entire organization? And why would a hacker come after me? I'm just this little person. That question is asked by individuals over and over again. And yet, in order for us as cybersecurity professionals to design, effective programs, to build out world-class, technology, we had to gain an understanding of the humans behind the system. And I think that remains one of the biggest areas of threat for us in cybersecurity. And the reason why I thought to bring it to you guys today in this keynote is because I really wanted us to start to dive into a new way by which to filter this idea of cybersecurity. I wanted us to really focus on what I perceive and what I'm hoping you will start to perceive as really the biggest threat to cybersecurity. It's the human in the middle. And why am I praying off the man in the middle? We security people have our own language, our own lingo. We talk to each other and it makes sense to us, but we're often talking in, zeros and ones as it relates to the broader business. I mean, really, what we're very good at is coming up with new cool tech, new cool language and things that we say to each other, which make sense to us. But in the end, we've got to start to shift the way we communicate, shift the way we think about this big threat, and start to talk more directly to the humans that are in the middle of any process, program, or system that we actually build. So the points I want to discuss for us today is human-centered design. And my background is as an attorney. I have not been a designer. I have not been just on the surface someone who focused heavily on the way in which things were built. I'm not an engineer. But what I am is somebody who had to, in the way I operated with regard to sales and marketing, focus very heavily on what the end result would be, what factors were being considered by the person who used it, and I had to figure out the real world applications of technology. So I feel like I'm best suited, having designed in my career several large-scale security platforms and programs for companies that are global 2,000 companies, in addition to really small, mid-sized businesses that don't have a lot of budget. So we're going to talk about human-centered design. We're going to talk about its applications, the challenges that we have in sort of, having us all center around the idea around it. And finally, I want to talk to you guys through that cyber revolution. What does the future look like for cybersecurity? So this idea of human-centered design, it means accepting the humanity and therefore the innate ingenuity and infallibility of technology users. I find it disappointing over and over again when I hear professionals, InfoSec professionals saying, users are stupid, they're not, they get in the way. Often I hear that, they just want to do the same things over and over again and they don't care. That may be true. I'm not going to go ahead and tell you that most people, they care, everyone cares. That's not true. Not all humans, not all employees, not all users don't care. I think one of the things that we need to keep in mind as it relates to risk is the biggest risks are attributed to and created by humans. And so as we look at this idea of cyber risk, without the idea of the people who actually create the risk, we miss a huge part of where the actual opportunity exists for us, right? We can continue to build great technologies and systems, but if we're not thinking about the end user, the user experience, how it will be used, we are missing an opportunity to create an impact the way in which cybersecurity works in the real world, and we're actually hindering the performance. So when we talk about human-centered design, I also think about this idea of system design, right? So how do the disparate parts of a program come together? And if you think about the human being, where do they sit in the middle? And as they sit in the middle, how do they impact the various parts? So when I think about users, when I think about employees, if we're talking about a business or government workers, or even people in their homes, I think about the fact that when you really think about the human mind, people are smarter than we give them credit for. What I'll tell you is, if you create an obstacle, it is human nature for someone to try to get around it. It is natural for people to want to ignore it. It is quite possible that any security control you put in place, some human will figure out how to bypass the thing. And really, that's what we call hacking. So if you think about the people who are hacking, or the black hat hackers, they tend to be really knowledgeable about how the human mind works as well. And they're very good about surreptitiously going around security controls. So if you think about the fact that on the other side of a breach or an incident or a system is a human being attempting to get into a system, then it's important for us, when we're thinking about design, to think about the human being who might be getting into our systems, and also the human being who would be using the systems, and figuring out how do we mitigate via technology, via process, via policy, the ways in which that human being has the ability to get around, to avoid, or to ignore security controls. If we think about that on a broader scale, we have the ability to start to really dig into and start to address the reasons why security controls and cybersecurity, despite all of the investment, is just not working. It requires us to take a new approach. And I'm suggesting, and I recommend strongly, that we focus on human-centered design. So human-centered design, the technical definition is, it's a process, mindset, and approach to solving complex problems. Once I joined this industry, one of the first things I said to myself was, I'm a problem solver. I don't see that what we're doing is any different than when, people first started to get into, pharmaceuticals. If you think about the way a pharmaceutical company works, it's designed to create medicine that solves ailments, that solves disease, like vaccines. The work that we do is complex as well. The difference is, the problems we're solving often can't be seen until the bad thing happens. So what we're trying to build with regard to our cybersecurity are solutions that anticipate the way in which a behavior might happen that might cause an impact that would negatively impact a system or an asset. And this can be very complex because it's not just what I'm telling you. It is, in the context of a business, it is a phishing email. It is an employee who perhaps is socially engineered. It is an asset that has vulnerabilities that have not been patched. It is two different departments with shared data that don't have the right policies attached to them, and therefore data is being leaked outside the organization. These problems exist. They're dynamic, ever-changing, and it requires us to have a cyber mindset. And my thought process is that a cyber mindset is really entrenched in this idea of human-centered design. And what we have to do in the space that we exist is to empower individuals to design new products, new services and systems that address what the core needs are for the people who identify a problem. So let's break that down a bit. Cybersecurity using human-centered design should be about the empowerment and the enablement of people. It should be about technology that is only built to enable the performance of people in doing their job. For instance, the purpose of a SIM when it was initially built, and we'll all argue about whether SIMs aren't valuable, whether they check a box or don't check a box. But the idea was you wanted to create a technology that was able to notify an organization of possible intrusion or other threats to the organization. Now, initially when those were built, The idea was very simple. It was, if people know when something goes wrong and they're notified, then they can respond. That's great. But a human-centered design approach, and I think a lot of SIMs are moving in that direction. They're moving into this idea that it is not just about the notification that something happened. We also want correlation. We want to make sure that the information we're giving is accurate. We want to think about the reduction of noise, too many alerts. So it's the idea of, are we notifying about the right thing at the right time? And who is the person to whom should respond in that situation? The other idea of human-centered design is that we want to ask ourselves, where does the SIM sit as it relates to people, process, and technology? And if you think about a SIM, the idea is, who has access to that SIM? What monitoring endpoint or is it detecting from? What parts of the business, perhaps? And then you also want to think about, what should the response be if something bad happens? Human-centered design actually pulls into focus this idea of a system design, the idea that nothing we're doing should be isolated, and that every person on the team, their contribution to that team is valuable, because in order for each technology and tool to work, it must be done in alignment with other humans. And I think the more cybersecurity begins to focus on this idea that it is about the human element, it is about the human error and mitigating that. But more importantly, it is about human and system design and this combination of human and technology working together synchronistically. So part of why I joined cyber, and part of why I stay, I am part of a community of wonderful cybersecurity experts, and every day I hear over and over again about how hard it is to do the work we do and how little we are appreciated for the work we do. And I'll tell you, the reason why security is really understood by those outside of it is that we often don't, if we're doing security well, people don't even know that we exist. I mean, really, we want to stay out of the way, but we want to stay guys. It's a very difficult job. And part of what I've seen in terms of organizations being able to bring security to the forefront, because I believe when enterprises bring security to the forefront, it reduces the load on us to justify ourselves. And that can be so painful. And so what I'm always asking us to think about as we do our jobs are, how do we focus what we do on people, right? And that requires us to leave the security team, to leave the security department, and to go in and have conversations with the users themselves. And I'm not even going to tell you that it's fun. It is not fun. I do that on a daily basis. And on one hand, if you're an extrovert, it can be a good time. It refreshes you, it rejuvenates you. But I'm more of an ambivert. So I would say that it can be draining. But our jobs, and there are very few security people that I find that don't want to do a good job. And oftentimes, when they have the conversations with the production team, if they're going out into the labs, if they're talking to the users while they're working at home or on the go, they find out a great deal about ways in which to do security better. And I think that's all this is about, is how do we do security better? How can we improve upon what we know we're doing, but ultimately in the grand scheme of things isn't working? What I found is that 86% of breaches are today financially motivated, right? So people are taking part in breaches for the fact of making money, selling data, getting access to particular systems. How much of that goes into the way in which we build out our programs? How much of that do we take into consideration when we are building out awareness programs? How often do we talk about this when we're buying technology? If we know that people are the hackers, the humans on the other side, are really looking to get access to data for the purpose of leveraging it for financial reasons, what part of that is going into the strategies that we're using, as we're doing penetration testing, right? So if I am a penetration tester and I'm thinking my job is to secure our systems, then what I want to do is put myself in the position of the hacker, right? If I'm going to do penetration testing better, I should know the mindset of the person who might do the hacking, because that's in fact what a penetration test is. It really is your ability to test a system the way a hacker might. So we've got to really understand why something's happening. I think too often we're missing that as a function of the conversations we're having. We need to really stop and think about the humans that are in cybersecurity, because we are not being hacked by bots. On the side of every bot is a human being who is pushing the button or is actually writing the command, right? So I just want us to kind of think through that. I think we have this, we're in this great place, I think, with cybersecurity today, where I think that we have an opportunity to build a future that is designed to secure from the beginning. It is by design that we take into consideration the human elements of things. And I think we stop and sit back and say, what are the parts of the way we do our work that we could do better? And I think the next step is that human element. So as I was preparing for this, I started to think about ways in which I had leveraged, this idea of human-centered design. And about 5 years ago, I mentioned that I built out with our security operations team, an Alien Vault Splunk integration that was the basis for a security operations center at the Bank of Monaco. To do that, so I was responsible for selling the solution. And effectively, in order to sell the solution, I had to understand the different disparate parts of it. And part of what was different about this solution is that it had to operate in Zambia. And I am not from Zambia. And so when we started to work together with the customer and we started to think about the solution, we came across several challenges. One of the challenges was latency. Because they didn't have steady electricity, we had to figure out, if we were to build this solution in Zambia, if we were to transport it to Zambia and then build it within their environment, what are the things that might happen that would impact its ability to work, to perform the way it was designed? We had to think through that. We also had to think about the people who were running the security operations center and what were the disparate responsibilities they had in addition to this that would require them to divide their time between the security operations center, the building of it, the ongoing management of the solution. And then finally, we had to figure out, okay, in this situation that something bad happened, given that we were an American-based firm, how would we be able to deliver solutions to them in the future? And all of that is not just plopping the technology down. It required that we take a multi-step approach in which we had to figure out if the end result was that we had a up and running security operations center in Zambia, thousands of miles away, what would be the impact, who would need to be involved, and why would we be responsible for ensuring the long-term continuity of it? So step one of that was we had to put ourselves in the position of the CISO. At that time, the CISO was a really very highly strategic person who was very clear on what the purpose was. He had a rock solid team of people who he had to support him. But what he didn't have was a dispersed team of individuals who could help him run that program, run the SOC. So we built the SOC in the capital, but he had endpoints and he had other banks across Zambia. And so what we had to do was figure out what was going to be his role, the roles of the people. We had to put a RACI together. And then we also had to figure out how we could enable technology in the situations where there are no humans involved. So human-centered design also accepts that there will also be a lack of human labor, and it allows for automation. So what we had to do was say, what is the problem, who's involved, and how can we make their experience with the solution easier? It started with empathy. Secondly, we had to find the why. Why did this SOC matter, right? So I showed you the picture of the people before. The SOC mattered because if there had been a breach of Zanaco, that bank would be taken down and they would be out of business. They'd lose substantial revenue. And so it's not just that we as security people are doing this in a vacuum. The work we do is so important because we hold up businesses. I think more and more organizations understand that a good cybersecurity program is a protection and it reduces liability. But we've got to keep driving why it matters, the purpose of it. And then even as we're building security controls, if our job is to enable the business to secure it, we have to make sure that it keeps running. And therefore our security controls can't stop business. And I'll take you back to Zanaco. When we were on site and we were working with the teams to build out the solution, we had to operate in the middle of the night. And I believe we did most of our work on a Wednesday. Here's why. On Wednesdays, the organization was already used to a shift change. They were used to lots of midweek interruptions. And therefore, our interruption, if joined with the rest of the interruptions, would be a great way to get into the business process without disrupting it. So because we understood why we were there, we understood that although securing the organization was important, it wasn't more important than the operations of the business. And so that was important. We then brainstormed. So we got on site and we actually put together a whiteboard, and it had all the tasks, everything we wanted to do. We had the CISO, we had the CEO of the bank come in, we had the auditor come in, we had finance come in, and our team came in along with our SOC leader in the US. And we all sat together and brainstormed. Now that we were in Zambia, understood what the limitations were, how we were to proceed with the implementation. And each person contributed and indicated what their part of it was and why they thought that they needed to be considered and what would be a non-negotiable for them. And it was only in bringing all these things together, writing them down, outlining them, deciding what the priorities were, that we could understand the best way to build out an implementation plan. And so it is about the talking. It is about the diversity of ideas, the collaboration. That's where we got all of the rich thought process going. And in doing that, we came up with the solution. That solution that we finally came up with was storyboarded. We built out a model, so it was wireframed, and we outlined what the steps were from step 1 to 4, and then there was high level 1 to 4, and then of course we had sub bullets. But essentially, we laid it all out, and it allowed each of us to really take a look and see, had our thoughts been reflected? Did we cover everything? Did we create a system that we could all live with, at least in the interim? And then we also wanted to figure out, if we delivered it as it was, would we be ensured as much success as was possible? And in doing so, what we found is that the best way to implement the SIM, but also the Security Operations Center, was to work with the data center, work in the data center in the morning. We would then have a number of disparate teams going out across the entire country to work on getting the solution implemented and the endpoints monitored at the different banks. We had to do that over a period of 2 to 3 weeks. And then we also came to the conclusion that we wouldn't actually launch the Security Operations Center for a few weeks. So we would set it up, but we wouldn't really turn the switch on until actually my team was back in the US and we could better manage anything bad that happened. So it really was about, how do we ensure that this that the bank is secured? How do we design a solution that meets the requirements for all the various stakeholders? How do we visualize it so that everyone can see and ensure that what they've contributed is actually reflected? And then finally, we had to test it. And so we did do a small test. I think we did it on the HQ using a very limited set of things. So they basically had they had production, and then they had the test. They had a range. So we set this up on a range that existed with the same solutions and the same limitations that we expected that they would have. So the latency issues, we actually used a generator instead of using regular power. We actually loaded it with a lot more systems and employees than might be. So we had to proportionally reflect what the actual situation would be. And so we overloaded it to see what that response was. And we found that was not a good thing to do. Our first test actually got us shut down. The generator failed. We ended up blowing some other system. And so we stayed up and stayed actually a week longer in order to get it up and running. But we were prepared for the thing to go badly. And what we needed to make sure is if we understood what the problems were up front, that we could ideally pivot. And what we were able to do, and I'll tell you, it was not a perfect engagement in any stretch of the imagination. But what I'll say is it taught us to pivot. It taught us, how to lead a program with a lot of different challenges that were against us in the project, but also when the thing went wrong, how to respond quickly to minimize impact. And I think because we had planned it, because we understood that we could not predict what employees would do because they had very low maturity. I think that their security systems are much better now, but at the time, this was the first security operations center they had. So we ran into so many challenges. But what we had to do was predict what could fail, test it, and then we had to pivot. And I think the pivot is where I think we had the most success. But, I'm talking about one story, and I'm doing that because I want you guys to understand that I get that what I'm saying sounds really rosy, but I've put a lot of this to the test, and I've actually seen a lot of great success in applying a lot of this. And so the 4 areas that I feel like we could directly apply a lot of what I'm saying is in the context of privacy. And I have privacy bolded because I think it directly, human-centered design and this idea of privacy is major because everyone is talking about the intersection between security and privacy today. And where security ends, the security is really one facet of its role is to provide protection for the privacy of data for users and consumers. So one thing we are responsible for is for privacy of data. And in my mind, the goal for privacy is to do no harm. So there's a conversation now that's going on with this idea of digital harms, right? What is the actual harm caused by technology? And really more specifically, what is the harm caused by breach of technology? And the idea when we think about privacy is we want to reduce the amount of data shared without permission. We want to make sure that people are only getting access to the data, zero trust, that they need to get. And then we also want to make sure that if a person indicates that you have the right to use their data, it's being shared only in permissible ways, only in the ways in which they told you that that's okay. And in the situation, because I'm an attorney, that it's not done in that way, that there are legal protections, that there are other protections that ensure that the impact to the person, the individual, is mitigated. And so when we think about human-centered design, in order for us to better understand and protect privacy rights, we've got to understand why privacy is important. Why do people care about the data that is about them? How could it possibly be used in ways that we haven't even thought through? And what are the harms caused when data is shared without permission or it's shared in ways that are unanticipated? Applying human-centered design there means that we are being very specific and we're being very thoughtful in the way in which we're using data. We're thinking about the ways in which people interact with data. what systems they use to extract data or to engage with it. And then we're also seeing what are the costs and what are the risks and benefits of actually sharing data, right? So if I'm on the security team, I also have privacy under me, or I work closely with the privacy team. It is my thought about, so if I'm going to be implementing a new system, who needs to have access to it? Why do they need to have access? And what do I need to ask of them in order to use the system? And if we do take that data, what is my responsibility in terms of protecting it? So these are greater questions about, you know, it actually elevates security because we're actually the protector of a person's identity, right? We have more that it's more than just financial now. It's also about this idea that we are the arbiters, we are the protectors of how people are seen, viewed, and how they're interacting with the digital world. Response and resilience. I am an advocate for this idea of resilience. I think where I get concerned is that we use it in this very broad context. When we talk about resilience, we've got to boil it down to its finer points, and it's got to be about, when we say resilience, what does it mean for an organization's security program to increase resilience? And if we focus on human-centered design, it means we understand intrinsically in the way in which we roll things out, how it is that we want people to respond when bad things happen. We are able to predict when something bad may happen. We have the controls in place at every step of a person's interaction with a system to ensure that were there a breach, there's a counter action, a notification, or a termination of service that reduces the way in which someone might exploit your system. So resilience is not just in isolation something that's intrinsically good. Resilience, without the idea of human-centered design, is an obstacle. If you think about a fort, businesses used to be built like forts, but you can imagine now the digital world requires that things be nimble, that they be moved around, that people be on the go, that things be mobile. If you're a security team building a fort, you are not building resilience, you're building obstacles. And human nature is to go around it. So what will happen is you'll get shadow IT. You'll get issues with third-party risk. You'll get all sorts of additional risks because we're not taking into consideration the ways in which people are motivated to build resilience, to act in ways that are in alignment with what security would want. It's got to be a collaboration between security, HR, legal, all the other areas, finance, all the other areas of designed around protection. Security must be resilient alongside those and in the context of the culture of the organization. So the cyber mindset is not about users thinking the way security people want them to think. It's about how we better understand how to build and design programs, how to engage and interact in ways that align ourselves with what the users want. So identity and access management, that is also an area in which I find is becoming more and more important. In fact, more people are saying, identity is really the perimeter. So it really is about who you are and who you are to this particular system. So the protection of data becomes important. So if I'm Juliet Okafor, in Discord, and I have a different name, I think it's Moo, and a series of numbers, but then on Twitter, I'm Jules Management, right? On LinkedIn, I'm Jules Okafor. My identity shifts with each system I interact with. And so human-centered design means, do those systems interact? Do I make it easy for people to leverage different profiles and personalities? What are the features that I expect because I've now gotten into the system? What things should I have access to given the identity that I've put up? What things should I be sharing or not sharing? This idea of human-centered design takes all of that into consideration. So if we figure out where we've gotten started, I'll be honest. Let me share that when I first got into cybersecurity, I was confused. I'd say I entered it and I could not understand why, and I've met with government security operations centers. I've been in those of credit unions early on. I was working with a lot of small and mid-sized banks. And, my job was to sell security systems. So I was like, okay, well, they've got a lot of problems. Great. They'd love for me to help. No, that was the last thing they wanted me to do, was to touch the thing that they'd set up for months on end, and they had just gotten to work in some, recognizable way. And I felt like I was watching a game of whack-a-mole. And what would happen is there'd be an incident that would crop up. They'd shoot it down. Then another one would crop up. They'd shoot it down. Then they'd have all kinds of fires. People would be running about. People would be burning out. There was lots of drinking, of course, and I'll admit to having, joined them. But they weren't solving the problem. It was just about getting that one thing done so you could move on to the other thing. We're so overloaded with things to do. We don't have time to look at things strategically. In fact, what's happening is, even when we're bringing on talent, new talent with fresh ideas, we're asking them to submit and fall into the very bad processes that already exist. And we're teaching them the bad habits we have. As an industry, what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out how to fight the bad guys and to stop the breach and to be, to get ahead of the problem, to move to the left. But the issue is that we don't have enough time. We don't have enough resources. And typically, we don't have a lot of internal support. And so I'm not blaming us for doing whack-a-mole. I just want us to start to figure out what is it that we need to do to really start to change and revolve so that the cyber of the future is not those of the past, because what we're doing now isn't working. And I'm hoping we can all agree that it's not working. One of the things that I've seen that I thought was really, really smart, but unfortunately only happens after a company is breached. They have one team that is responsible for maintaining, and they have another team responsible for strategy and building. And what happens is, when one team is focused on reacting, they can keep everything going, the systems are running, they can respond to employees and users who are telling them the bad things are happening. They can, have analysts who are reviewing, the notifications and the alerts as they're coming in. But you also need a team that's sitting to the side, and not a big team, maybe 2 to 3 people, who are really taking a systems design look and saying, we've got now technology everywhere. We've got, all the good stuff. We've got technology that's been in here for days. But we also have technology that we've had for years that is no longer, is end of life. We need to pull out. We have users who are complaining that they can't get access to certain systems, and we spend a lot of our time with IT, telling them who should have access, who shouldn't, and fighting these fires, fighting these wars. What is the thing that we can do that, if we assume humans are the center of both the problem and the solution, we can use technology to enable their work product, their communications, and make it easier for them to do their jobs? It should be about how security and technology enables the human to do their job. It's got to be about the behaviors we understand in humans that we anticipate will happen. We do this on the other side. When we think about the kill chain, an attack kill chain, we have the ability to automate responses based on how we think a hacker will attack. In fact, the whole idea of threat intelligence is the same way. What we haven't done is then apply that inside the organization so we can anticipate the way users will behave, and then we've applied technology to respond. It seems on one end, when we think about hackers, we've done our job there. But when we think about our users, we think of them as either just neglectful, reckless, or stupid. And we haven't done our homework there to really start to dig into how could we have both user experience, service delivery, right? Meet service delivery times, but also make sure that the security works. I think that we're deploying security, but we're not making sure it works. And it can't work if we don't understand how it's supposed to interact with the human beings that are the focus. I think that every one of us in cybersecurity are designers. I think our craft, our trade requires this. And I'll tell you a little secret. I also think that many of us are much more artists than we are scientists. Cybersecurity, compared to the rest of the industries, medicine, manufacturing, it is still so new that we all act as artists and designers. There is scientific foundation. I will not say that that does not exist. What I will tell you is that we all have the ability to design the way in which we deliver and perform in our roles. And the way in which the future will demand that we design cybersecurity is by encouraging and enabling humans as a part of any product or solution that we put out, as a part of any report that we create. Is the report that I'm creating make sense to me, but could a common person read it? Could your mother or grandmother read it? Would they care? And if they wouldn't care in your first draft, how do you make them care? As a designer, you have the ability to empower yourself and others by the way in which you do your job. So it is important that we take humans into consideration throughout the entire life cycle of any project or initiative, any change management strategy, or even any incident response program. We have to begin to design the way in which we want users to engage with us and with the systems that we're providing. So I want us today to begin to imagine a world where we are reducing friction. And some of this stuff sounds soft and it sounds, it sounds like it's something that's kind of made up and fuzzy. But I imagine each of you is doing it in your job today. It is about going against the grain. It is about asking yourself ways that you could potentially be better. It is about asking whether or not, and this is something you can ask in meetings with your bosses, is what we're doing working? How is what I'm doing supposed to work? What does performance look like? If we succeed, what should it feel like? Those are human-centered, design-centered questions. In addition, we've got to figure out how what we do fits into a broader subsection of a system. A system is the business outside of it, but more importantly, the different domains inside of cybersecurity, how do they all fit together? How does the penetration team fit with the threat intelligence team that fits with the awareness team that fits with the vulnerability management team? How do they all work together? And what should that feel like? I think right now, a lot of it can be very clunky. Human-centered design will focus on, if the human's at the center of this, what should their experience be in each of these domains? And that will be what brings it together. I think a lot of security tends to be very disparate. We also want to ask more questions. So what is it that what's happening? Why is it happening? What's the purpose? Asking purpose-based questions. We want to conduct our research. So what is it that we see? Where is it that I can get more information? Who else has done this? I think Twitter is a great place for that. I think I find a lot of interesting stories on Reddit, but there's a lot of forums that you can find where you're really doing your research on what people have done, but also if you're looking to move into systems design thinking, let's start to talk to some systems engineers. Also, you might be able to work with some people in IT who've done this kind of work. That's really the goal here. And then pretend to be someone else. We have some very great personalities inside of cybersecurity. But in order for us to make a change, we've got to sit in the position of someone other than us, someone other than someone like us. So I'm ADHD, highly sensitive empath, but I have extroverted tendencies. I've got to sit with someone who is introverted, maybe not as highly intellectual, not highly analytical, who really just doesn't care about security. It is that person who will give me the best perspective on how to change my communication. I have to go outside of myself and actually to the opposite side in order to better understand what the possibilities are. So I mentioned that. So you got to ask, who will use the technology? What will they use it for? How will they use it? And does it solve the problem that they're looking to solve? Cybersecurity is a problem-solving industry. It is about the end result. And the way that we get there is by asking questions that are designed around the human. Part of the process that I encourage is find inspiration. So when I say inspiration, I mean what you want to start to do is let's look at what is possible. So I like to, when we're doing brainstorming, put out all the different things that are possible. You want to be bringing in different industry work. So a lot of the work I do is really inspired by marketing. I like a lot of working on diversity job descriptions. I look at marketing job descriptions. With a lot of the work we do, I actually look at coding for the kind of thinking that I need to actually empathize with. So there are ways to be inspired. You've got to find that inspiration. It's got to be outside yourself. Ideation, brainstorming, collaboration. So talking it through. Lots and lots of communication back and forth. All of those planning sessions, those work groups, those are so critical to human-centered design. And then implementation. You got to put it into practice, put it into operations, test, and pivot. So but I want you guys to do, not to think, but to do. It's in the doing that we see the change happen. Ultimately, what we want to make sure is that we are, with human-centered design, doing three major things. We can see an increase in performance. We need to be measuring whether the security controls we're putting in place, whether the programs that we're building, and whether the awareness areas that we tend to communicate are actually performing. Is it working? Do people care? And are we seeing a reduction in risk based on what we're having happen? We need to improve the user experience. So are people coming back to us and saying this is great, or are they saying, please, no more? Or, are we telling them no before they come to us? What is the actual engagement that we're doing with users so that they feel like they are part of the process by which we're working? We in security can't work in isolation. And then one of the things I learned my first year of law school by a professor who I remember today, but he was very, very mean to me. When I rambled on and on in my law school class, what he said was, keep it simple, stupid. And I thought it was a little bit of an insult, but what he was saying is, if you cannot explain to the average person in a short amount of time what you're doing and why it matters, you do not understand it. As security professionals, if we're thinking about other people, all the language that we think works for us is great, but it may not work for other people. And our job is to solve problems, to increase performance, and really to enable others to do the best job that they can. When we do that, we are actually delivering on what our promise is. So our future, our collective future looks like this. I want you all to go out and start to imagine the ideal security scenario. What does that look like? Over and over again, I hear how little people get with regard to, they're doing their job, but they don't see the progress, or they are in a situation where they don't feel appreciated. Imagine your ideal scenario. Imagine that you were the person who was impacted by your security. How would you want that to look like or feel? Start to practice saying yes, but. I envision a future that is security, that is future, that is forward thinking, but it's also service leaning. It is about delivering a service that is really complex, but it's also high impact. And so you want to start to say yes, but. Instead of no, we're going to be the organization that says yes, but. We also then finally want to understand the user's understanding of security. We have to meet the users where they are. So it's not enough for us to take our certs and for us to go to all the cons and for us to do the gamification. What is it about what we're learning that we can apply and translate so that a user with little knowledge about cybersecurity can benefit from it? We've got to start talking less about knowledge and more about benefit. That is what I see as the future of cybersecurity. And I, again, want to thank you. This is the end of my presentation. And if you're looking to connect with me, feel free to visit me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram.